We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to Pick a Disc, the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. My name's Matt Latham and today we are glad to welcome back Colin from the We Dig Music podcast to talk about Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds book by H.G. Wells. And yeah, it's a long album and we talk about it and we do all sorts of things. But it's nice to have Colin back. I mean, Colin's back for a record 5th appearance on the podcast and it's actually been a long while and surprisingly I was surprised myself how long it's been since he's last been on. But you'll find out that in a second. But, you know, before the conversation goes in, this is the bit why I'm going to have to do a little bit of a plug for the social media places. So, for example, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram under Pick a Disc. There's also a Discord server if you really want to join that. You can click on the link in the show notes and come in and say hello and tell us how much you like the podcast or tell me how much you hate the podcast or the podcast would be much better with a different host. I'm not going to take it personally. Yeah, I am really, but no, you know what I mean. So yeah, so that's all the plugging away. All I want to say is that this is the last episode of 2021, so technically it's the 3rd season finale, even though we don't do seasons. So I'm looking forward to coming back for our 4th year. So, and stay tuned and you'll start seeing a few daily episodes coming up after Christmas in the lead up to New Year, about my top albums of the year. But before that, we need to get through the conversation with Colin, so let's speak to him. And for a record-breaking 5th appearance on Pick a Disc, it's Colin from We Dig Music. How you doing, Colin?
I'm all right. It's good to be back. It's been ages.
Yeah, so this point last year, I was speaking to Helena, who had for a 4th appearance, and I made the kind of joke saying that, I know I'm actually starting to expand and network and speak to new people and stuff because it's been a whole year since you've been on. And I was just before we started, I was going, hang on, when's the last time I did a Pick a Disc with Colin? It was actually in person in my front room.
Yeah, so it was
in March last year, and I counted, and for the spreadsheet, I just went from the episode that was after you, which was our mutual friend Mark from Comatose, and counted down until this one. There's 44 episodes since you've last been
bloody
on.
hell, that's a lot.
This is episode 77. There's been over half of the podcast, life of the podcast since you've last been on. And I usually have the joke that you're just driving outside my house waiting to jump in again, which is kind of weird.
It's because you've not let me in.
I know, yeah. I've changed the locks. I've got a video camera which has a special alarm when it detects you. It goes. Actually, I think it's the napalm death sting you always put in.
Excellent.
In we dig music whenever I mention napalm death.
Yeah.
But yeah, Colin, it's been too long, I think, since you've last been on here.
I mean, we've done loads of Shipwrecked and Comatose episodes since then.
Yeah, definitely.
And a few of them with us both on there. So
you've been here several times. You know what the drill is. We're not here to talk about all that kind of hogwash.
No.
Red Dwarf. Who wants to talk about Red Dwarf when there's music around? We're here to talk about an album, and as usually, this is coming up to the end of the 3rd year. Technically, in my head, I kind of see the last episode of the year as kind of the season finale or the year finale.
Yeah.
So, and last 2 years it's been Christmas based ones. You was on the first one with a kind of premise breaking playlist that you created. Last year we covered the Love Actually soundtrack with Meg from Gin and Beer It, and I was going to do something a bit different. I didn't want to do another Christmas episode. I thought, let's try and do something
epic.
Let's try and do something. And you said, I've got an idea, and I think it was deliberately aimed to piss me off, I think.
Not entirely.
Goes, okay. It was like, what can I challenge Matt with? And what do I know about his music taste that he dislikes, and what I can try and. So, this is not reflective of my overall opinions on what I'm about to talk about, but I feel part of you kind of was almost trying to troll me in terms of this pick. Am I correct?
Not entirely. No, I do genuinely love this album.
But to be fair, I mean, you could have gone. You've joked about picking a lot worse.
Yeah. There's
Yes.
there's albums I like that you would hate a lot more than this.
But
Save those for the 6th appearance. Actually, no, I've promised you for the next appearance it will be an album which is like less than 35 minutes long.
Somehow I don't believe you. But yeah, okay, we're coming up to about 4 minutes talking. We actually not mentioned what the album is yet. So, Colin, why don't you tell the lovely listeners, put them out the misery, if they haven't even looked at the name of the episode on our podcast app, the disc that you've picked for today.
Well, it's 2 discs because it's a double album. It is the 1978 absolute masterpiece, Jeff Wayne's musical version of War of the Worlds.
Yes, it's Jeff Wayne's musical version of War in the Worlds. It's the debut album by Jeff Wayne, retelling the story of the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. It was released in the UK on the 9th of June 1978. A concept album and a rock opera, its main format is progressive rock and string orchestra using narration and lead motifs to carry the story and rhyming melodic lyrics that express the feelings of the various characters. The double album remains a bestseller, having sold 15 million copies worldwide, with more than 200,000 copies sold in the US and nearly 3 million in the UK. In 2018, it was named the 32nd best-selling studio album of all time in the UK, and it spawned multiple versions, including video games, DVDs, and live tours.
Yep.
So before we talk about it a bit more, why have you picked this album?
Well, no one would have believed in the last days of 2021 that Pick a Disc's affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of the other music podcasts on the We Made This network. No one could have dreamed that Matt was being scrutinised as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other podcasts, and yet, across the gulf of the We Made This network, minds immeasurably superior to Matt's regarded his podcast with envious eyes, and slowly and surely they drew their plans against him. Dun dun dun! Obviously.
So this is a coup then? You've come to take over Pick a Disc?
Well, we just basically, it's a laugh,
Oh
innit?
my God, Mark's had a massive effect on you. You want more podcasts?
No, it is an absolutely unique record. It was a massive cultural phenomenon in the UK, Australia and New Zealand. But it's still pretty obscure in the USA from my research. It sold a little bit at the time, but it's not one that people have really remembered. And it still doesn't get talked about much these days, despite it selling millions of copies and being like popular enough to have regular arena tours, and there's even like an interactive VR experience at the moment in London, which I want to go to at some point. It's a classical prog disco concept album, which you don't get many of them, and it's written by someone, Jeff Wayne, who had previously mainly done music for adverts, and it's based on one of the best and most influential science fiction stories of all time. And it's got really cool synth noises all over it. And it's an album that I was into from a really, really young age. So it sort of helped introduce me to science fiction, and like even before I'd seen Star Wars and that kind of thing. It means I've always dug alien invasion stuff like Independence Day and, A Quiet Place and that kind of thing. And apocalyptic fiction like Fallout and Walking Dead and that sort of thing. And it means that I've always loved the story of it as well. All the different adaptations. This is obviously the first version of War of the Worlds that I ever knew, but like I've read the original book since then. There's the Orson Welles radio adaptation, which was supposedly caused a mass panic, although actually
yes,
didn't when you look into it. That was 1938 that was broadcast. And it was basically in the format of a news broadcast, so people allegedly tuned in partway through and got terrified that aliens actually were invading. Like there's the 50s B-movie version, there's the Tom Cruise massive blockbuster, which I've visited. There's the plane crash set from that is on the Universal Studio Tour, so I've walked around that. Like the recent BBC series was really good. It's just something that's always stayed with me, and I've always sort of really dug it.
Okay, so a big War of the Worlds fan. Yeah. What's interesting I mean, I'll get to the discovery of how you first listened to this in a second, but a couple of things you mentioned kind of triggered a couple of questions that I had. So, from getting to know you over the past few years because of the We Made This Network and stuff, and and also listening to We Dig Music and through with this month's issue, getting a kind of sense of your music taste, and it's kind of weird because again I'm bringing up Mark Adams, who I mentioned before. He's come up with the term Polymath, which is kind of a unique umbrella term, which I'm not sure whether I'm not sure whether he's come up with himself or if it's a term he's used. I'm not sure, but the idea being that he feels like he's a jack of all trades, master of none, but a very very jack, for lack of a better term. And I'm getting the impression that you were very much like the polymath of music, in that you've got your toes dipped into so many different things that. Yeah,
well, so far the albums that I've talked about when I've been on here before there was a Bright Eyes record, so that's sort of indie folk. Then there was White Zombie, which is like 90s sci-fi metal. And then there was a Christmas compilation, and now there's this, which is just completely unique and utterly mental.
But I think gathering your kind of music taste, or what your I mean, as I said, you're quite open in your music taste, but there are certain elements of music that you quite like more than others. And hearing you talk about kind of like the synths and kind of like the prog stuff, this, I could see, I mean, like, if you just listen to this now, this would tick a lot of boxes for you in terms of your music taste.
Yeah, definitely.
So a lot, and I feel, and when you talk about hearing it, I feel this could be one of the reasons why you kind of like those aspects in other music.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Yeah. So, like, because you mentioned, example, We Dig Music, you talked about kind of suddenly how you're like, oh, I really dig the synths in these bits and stuff. And I've got a feeling that might be on here because, I mean, late 70s, this might be one of the first instances of, like, kind of synth music just before New Wave kicked in. There were synths before then. So if you want to go from
that. So there were synth records prior to this, going back about a decade or so. You'd got people like Wendy Carlos, who was she was an absolute synth pioneer. She was putting out records of like it was sort of classical music but played on like a Moog or something like that, and it was seen as quite a novelty sort of thing. And then obviously you've got Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and people like that who were doing more experimental, interesting things. But this is around the point it started becoming more of a mainstream instrument. And the guy that actually played synth on this, I'll get into in a bit, but he is Ken Freeman. He's an absolute pioneer himself in his own right in regards to synthesizers. But we'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay. So, I mean, how did you discover this album / Jeff Wayne?
So it's a record I've been listening to for longer than I can remember. My dad bought it before I was born. So this came out 4 years before I was born. And I just grew up listening to it and being absolutely fascinated with the record. It's got really cool artwork. So you've got the gatefold record, but then there's a LP-sized booklet, which has got really cool paintings inside. And sort of, I can remember when I was really, really little, sitting there listening to the record and looking through the booklet at the art. I was talking to my dad at the weekend about how he actually first got the record, and it's pretty cool. He used to work for Jaguar Cars at the Castle Bromwich Jaguar car factory.
Oh, okay.
And from what he was telling me in the 70s and 80s, it basically seems like it was essentially Mos Eisley Spaceport. There were people like running gambling rings, and there was people walking around selling random stuff. And there was even dudes that used to like sneak like various car parts that were supposed to go on the cars to themselves and then make like banjos out of them. But there was this guy that used to walk around selling records, and this is one that my dad bought. Because there was a guy going around selling them for a little bit cheaper than they would have been in the shops. Don't know if he'd entirely got them legitimately.
Allegedly.
But They just didn't sort of ask. You know, it's over 40 years ago, statute of limitations and all that. But yeah, I can remember being really little and being absolutely fascinated by the artwork and stuff. And I was looking into it, the art in there. There's 3 different artists, and most of them are like sort of, you know, the classic like Isaac Asimov science fiction book covers of like the 60s and 70s, that kind of thing. But so Peter Goodfellow, who's the guy that did some of the art in there, he also, as well as doing various sci-fi book covers, designed the National Lottery It Could Be You hand.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And then you've got Jeff Taylor, who did some of the other art, later on became a designer for Games Workshop, doing loads of their sort of artwork for the like boxes and stuff. And then Mike Trim, the third artist in there, was also, before this, a model maker for Jerry Anderson. So he was building models for Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet and Joe 90, which is pretty awesome.
Oh, wow. Okay. So a lot of lineage through
there's so many weird and cool connections with this album with various completely fucking random things.
Yeah. So before you head up to, like, again, as a whole, I quite like the idea for those who are kind of unfamiliar with the album that we're talking about. So this is it's a different kind of adaptation of a novel. Of a novel where in a musical form, but it's not just. But it's kind of, it's almost like an audio drama. But without less acting, more narration. But there is then kind of scenes of narration. It feels like a book, but then drifts into an audio drama. Then it kind of drifts into like an instrumental orchestral score for a film. Then it goes back to an audio drama. Then like feels like you're listening to a rock album. And at one point you think you're going into a disco album. At one point.
More than one point. There's loads of disco on this. Yeah, it was 78.
Yeah, I can't remember where I read it, but there was a review or something on a review. It might be either All Music or a user commentary where I can't remember what site it might have been on, but someone was saying, like, if there was one thing that prog rock heads hated in the late 70s, it was disco. So naturally, one of the more obscure, critically acclaimed prog rock albums contained disco. And they didn't realise it because they were too stoned. So aside from kind of this fusion of different storytelling narrative techniques, there's also a fusion of genre. And it's like one of those things where it's like the Family Guy sketch where to talk about chocolate peanut butter, and it's like a car crash, and they just kind of like crash each other, and this police officer sees two people, one's holding a chocolate bar, one's holding peanut butter, and it goes, "You got chocolate on my peanut butter, you put peanut butter on my chocolate," and then the police officer just shoots both of them and nicks the chocolate peanut butter. This feels like a kind of like fusion of things that's just like fusion of these different kind of genres.
It's a bit like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all, you know, melded together in ways you really wouldn't expect. But yeah, like you were saying about it being a sort of audio drama, so you've got really well-respected actor Richard Burton, who's like, you know, been acting since the 30s or 40s. I think he died in the 80s, so it was towards the end of his career at this point. So he's doing sort of like the main narration.
He's also got one of Hollywood's most distinctive, commanding, kind of deep voices that is very recognisable. Like it's like immediate. I think it's kind of like why they had Orson Welles, because Orson Welles also had a very unique kind of delivery, so you knew it was him and Richard Burton. So it adds an element of kind of Hollywood international gravitas to it.
Yeah,
and it's
although he's Welsh.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you couldn't tell. Like,
No, it's not. He's not speaking in like a Cardiff accent or anything. That'd be great. But yeah, then with the sort of the music, so you've got there's narration to tell you what's happening, but then there's also there are songs where obviously the lyrics are sort of telling you what's happening, but there are there's like pieces of music that recur throughout, which is a leitmotif. So one of the things that it makes me think of is, have you ever heard that Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf? Which is you get a lot of people got played it at school.
I don't recall it. It's probably one of those things that if you suddenly heard it, you'd be like, oh, but from the top of my head, no.
It's basically it's a classical version of the Peter and the Wolf story, but all of the animals in it are played by a different instrument.
Oh, okay.
So, like, you've got the flute is one animal, and then the tuba's another one, and that sort of thing. But this has got various different little melodies and sounds. Like one of the main ones is the Martians have this weapon called the heat ray, and Joe Partridge, one of the guitarists on there, has got this really distinctive, like fuzzed up slide guitar sound, which is the heat ray. So whenever you hear that, you know that they're firing this weapon. And then you've also got there's like the aliens sort of war theme and stuff like that, which is the main theme.
The synth riff, as I refer to it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of synth riffs. But you've got like the aliens sort of, there's like a little bass riff like going do 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 do, which sort of occurs throughout it, which is like, that's when the aliens are sort of setting things up and that kind of thing, and they're just, creeping around or whatever. And you've got so many different leitmotifs and themes that all come back at various points in the story. And when you know it well enough, as soon as you hear something, you're like, so that's what's happening here. And yeah, it's quite nerdy and cool. Obviously, cool is relative in this. This is probably the least cool album ever recorded, but that just makes it one of the most cool albums ever recorded. And I like it, and I'm one of the coolest people in the universe, so that also makes it really cool.
I mean, it's kind of unique way of adapting something. It's the first time I've really heard of it, although that said, I'm pretty sure the main kind of synth riff that's in the first and the Eve of the War, or whatever it's called, the that bit, that kind of, that felt familiar. I must have heard. It's one of those things I must have heard at some point.
You can't have missed hearing it at some point, because it's so much in sort of various bits of popular culture. But these days, it doesn't tend to get talked about much, apart from the arena tours and stuff like that. It's one of these albums that loads of people our age will have been introduced to it by their parents. I'm thinking, as you're a little bit younger than me, it might be that your parents are a bit younger than my parents. So it might be that they, weren't as into it, so possibly haven't introduced you to it that way.
I don't think my parents were kind of into Jeff Wayne or War in the Worlds. My dad, perhaps, but I don't. It's probably not his kind of music.
Yeah.
He doesn't really.
Whereas I've got loads of friends who grew up with it and knew it from when they were kids, enough to just randomly reference it every now and again, and people know what you're on about and stuff.
But yeah, I mean, the kind of genre of adapting other media into music, I don't know that much, but the only kind of ones that jump to me is that through my friend Addis, who's been on talking about steps and Dexys Midnight Runners. He used to kind of put on gigs at the Bright House in Birmingham, and one of the bands that played there a couple of times was a band called the Retrospective Soundtrack Players.
Okay.
And they've had 3 albums out. But unfortunately not together much anymore. The lead singer Kyle is now writing books about kind of maths and cool ways to learn maths and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, but they've got 3 albums, and each album is an adaptation of a different thing. The first album is called Hand Luke, which is basically
Cool Hand
Yeah,
Luke.
And if Cool Hand Luke had a musical that was basically like folk rock. The second album, which is their best, is Catcher in the Rye, which is an adaptation of the book Catcher in the Rye.
Yes, I got that from the title.
I'm just checking.
It's a good clue there.
Yeah, I'm just checking. I also know you're paying attention. But yeah, which is my favourite out of the two. And then the third album is kind of a mashup of It's a Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol. It's like a Christmas album, and I think Alice used to keep joking, when are you gonna write the album big? But unfortunately that didn't happen. But that's the closest I've got to kind of like the idea of adapting other work. But
I mean, there's a good sort of tradition of it. I mean, you've got there's a really cool band that I used to watch at Glastonbury quite often. They used to be playing the bandstand nearly every year, called the Bookshop Band. And all of their songs are based on books that they've read.
Was that like one song per book, or
sometimes they did? I think they did one album where it was the whole album was based on a particular book, but a lot of the time it's just one song per book.
Right? Okay, because I think the Retrospective plays it was like each song was building up on plot points or characters in the book.
Yeah, so it's like the concept of the entire thing.
Yeah.
But then you've also got Iron Maiden do that a lot with. They use a lot of literature in their subject matter for their songs, like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and various other things that I've completely fucking blanked on at the moment. But there's lots. Basically, it's all either about history, films, or books. For Iron Maiden, a lot of the time, and then earlier than this, you'd got Rick Wakeman doing things like Journey to the Centre of the Earth and the Six Wives of Henry VIII and stuff like that, which some of those were designed as a live performance on ice and stuff like that, which is just absolutely ridiculous. But that's because it's Rick Wakeman and that's what he does.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin on this line of questioning because it's something that perhaps we'll probably come back to when we talk about the live aspect like near the end of our chat. But what I'll probably do, so I think instead of going by track, like going through the tracks as usual, we're probably going to end up flipping around because of the unique nature of the album. We'll probably start talking about highlights and memorable bits like you would with a film more than perhaps an album, because it feels like a narrative, or as I mentioned earlier, audio book. So I'm just going to briefly, for people listening, I'm going to give you I'm going to kind of skim through the plot section of Wikipedia just to try and get you a general idea of what's happening. So Richard Burton plays is the voice of the journalist, who mentions about set in the late 19th century. So this is from a book that was written in the 1890s about advanced beings from Mars coming down to Earth. So, for example, at the very start, the journalist begins to see bursts of green gas over 10 nights, and they erupt from the surface of Mars, and they appear to approach Earth. There's an astronomer who says that no life could possibly exist on Mars, and there's no danger. Then eventually something crashes into Horsell Common.
What he actually says is the chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1. He said, but still they come.
Yeah. Which was that? Who sang that? Was that?
That is. It's. Is it David Essex on that bit?
Was it Phil Lynott?
No, Phil Lynott is. Phil Lynott is Parson Nathaniel.
Right. Okay.
No, David Essex is the artilleryman. Hold on. I think it's Justin Hayward.
Okay.
That sings that bit. Who's from the Moody Blues?
Right. Okay. So the astronomer and the journalist find this cylinder, and when it unscrews, a Martian creature emerges, and
with all like tentacles and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And when a group of men approach them, they incinerated by a heat ray. Which is an advanced weapon. The journalist flees, and hammering sounds and then heard from a pit that's formed. A company of soldiers are deployed, and that evening an injured and exhausted artilleryman wanders into the journalist's house and tells him his comrades have been killed by fighting machines, tripod vehicles built, controlled by Martians, each armed with its own heat ray. And that image is probably one of the kind of walking tripods with like little circles. Is one of the most common and probably well-known images in science fiction. So if you've suddenly thinking, oh, that sounds familiar. If you've ever seen a science fiction pulp painting or picture of like a round kind of dome with like a glowing eye with 3 legs on it, that is one of those machines from War of the Worlds.
Yep.
So the journalist and the artilleryman set off to London, with the journalist trying to ensure that his lover Carrie is safe, and the artilleryman is to report to headquarters. They are soon caught in the crossfire between soldiers and Martians, and they're separated. 3 days later, the journalist arrives at Carrie's house but finds it empty, and then he resolves to escape London by boat, and later catches sight of Carrie aboard a steamer. But the gangplank is raised before he can join her. Fighting machines approach, and then they are engaged by the Royal Navy battleship Thunderchild, and both are destroyed. Steamer escapes, but Thunderchild and the crew destroyed by Martian heat rays, leaving England defenceless against the invasion. Then we have part 2, which I'm assuming is the second LP.
It is. So Earth Under the Martians.
Yes. So then the journalist discovers red weed is growing across Earth, and it's the vegetation that gives Mars its colour.
That bit is showing that H.G. Wells. At that point, the science wasn't quite up there to know why Mars was red, because H.G. Wells' explanation for this red weed was that's what makes Mars look red. So they've basically planted it all over the Earth so it looks like Mars.
Well, I mean, a slight detour. I mean, what I find quite interesting, because I ended up having a brief look into the history of science fiction, because this is one of the first science fiction novels of all time. I think the Time Machine by H.G. Wells and
that was earlier.
I think Mark Twain wrote Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, which I think was before this, which was one of the first. Yeah. Which technically is a time travel, which is basically the First Night. It's basically like First Night, or and I'm pretty sure there's been an adaptation with Martin Lawrence actually. Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, I think. Yeah, but so like, I mean, the fact that someone from the 1890s is thinking this is something I wouldn't have thought anyone could have the imagination of doing. But then again, when was Metropolis? Metropolis and A Trip to the Moon was...
Yeah, not long later, within about 20 years.
I think A Trip to the Moon... Actually, I need to fact it.
This is two podcasts I've recorded within 3 days of each other, mentioning A Trip to the Moon, both on double sort of concept albums, because I appeared on the Broken Record Player podcast the other day talking about Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and Infinite Sadness, who
the Tonight video.
Tonight video is A Trip to the Moon.
That's the only Smashing Pumpkins song I know, actually. But yes, so The Trip to the Moon was 1902, so we're...
Oh, right.
Yeah. So
that's earlier than I thought. So yeah, that's within about 8 years, I think.
Oh, actually, saying that, that film is actually a kind of adaptation of an 1865 novel by Jules Verne.
Oh, of course, Jules Verne. Yeah, Jules Verne was writing things slightly earlier.
Right. So okay. So that's what.
But it's one of the early ones. It's I believe it's the first like Martian invasion movie.
Yeah.
Martian invasion novel. Yeah, it wasn't a movie when movies hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah,
that would have been really, really before its time.
Yeah. So this is when he meets Parson Nathaniel and his wife Beth. The trio take refuge in a nearby cottage that's soon surrounded by black smoke, which is a chemical weapon. Parson Nathaniel goes driven mad by the attacks, blames himself, and believes that they are demons arising from evil.
The devil.
His wife Beth gets killed after
part of the house falls on her.
Yeah, and then the Martian,
which would do it.
And then the Martians construct a machine which is like a spider-like vehicle to try and capture and collect humans and to harvest them.
When they're seen injecting the blood of the humans into their veins.
Yes.
Which is pretty badass.
How old were you when you were listening to this?
I think I was probably 3 or 4 when I was first listening to this.
This explains a lot. Because it's quite, because it's like kind of gruesome body horror, but without the visuals when you think about it, isn't it? So it's
so you're using your imagination, so it's even better.
So,
but you have got the cool pictures in the pictures in the art book are mostly, I don't think they're that horrific, other than there is one photo of basically the attack on London, where you've got loads of people running, screaming in terror. That one's quite striking, and I suppose you could find that quite scary. But I was showing all the pictures to my 5-year-old daughter the other day, and she just thought it was quite cool. But then she is pretty badass.
Yeah, passing the same experiences down a generation.
I am. If she'd got a bit more of an attention span, I would sit there and listen to the album with her, but that would not happen at the moment.
So Nathaniel resolves to destroy these demons. The journalist knocks him unconscious to silence his ravings, but Eclaw comes to the cottage and drags Nathaniel away. As the Martians abandon the camp, and the journalist continues the journey to London, and he again encounters the artilleryman, who's now planning a life underground that will allow humans to evade the Martians, strike back. The journalist realises that the ambitions exceed the artilleryman's ambitions exceed his abilities, and leaves. And upon reaching London...
Yes, because he's talking about making the entire city underground, and he's dug a basically 10-foot pit in a week.
Yeah. So upon reaching London, he finds the city desolate and empty. Driven to suicide by intense despair and loneliness, he surrenders to a fighting machine, but realises it's inert, the Martian inside dead. And in an epilogue, the journalist reports that the Martians were defeated by Earth's bacteria, to which they had no resistance. And with that, humanity recovered from the invasion. He was reunited with his lover Carrie. But, as he says, the question remains, is Earth now safe, or are the Martians learning their failures and preparing a second invasion? And at the post-credits scene, NASA meet Nick Fury, and that's the MCU. A NASA mission to Mars flounders when the control center loses contact with the craft. The controller sees a green flare erupt from Mars' surface. The controller tries to contact NASA, but all communication seems to have been blocked. This leaves a question mark what's going to happen and the fate of Earth, with the possibility of a second Martian invasion. And the album ends.
And the NASA guy is played by Jerry Wayne, Jeff Wayne's dad.
Ooh, okay.
Who's an actor. But yeah, I think it might be the first sort of fiction I remember of the classic, it's okay, we've defeated the baddie, but then there's the baddie's still alive.
Yeah.
Bit. Like at the end of, Halloween and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I mean, because I think as well, because you've got an 8, because you're not going to have that in the original novel. That's something that Jeff Wayne's added.
That was added. Yeah. It'd be really impressive if he'd added all the stuff about NASA and mission control in the late 1800s.
Yeah, I mean...
That'd be very prescient.
I mean, I thought H.G. Wells had decent foresight, but not that well. But it allows... Because it's a nice kind of addition to that matches the tone of the album. And interestingly enough as well, one of the notes I had was, and I can never say this word right, is it anachronistic in the use?
Anachronistic, yes. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever used that word right. In that it's like when I think when you watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and all the songs in the end credits are about 20 years ahead of
right, or like A Knight's Tale, where it's all got like Queen on the soundtrack and stuff.
Yeah,
set in the
and you got the Craig
medieval times.
Yeah, and you've got I think I've not watched it. I'm only going from what I've read. I think Bridgerton, the Shonda Rhimes Netflix show, I think that has kind of modern day soundtracks in a period drama.
Right.
But some people might look down on that, but I think, when by its very nature, period dramas are using future technology to tell stuff in the past anyway, and this is doing the exact same thing. Yeah. But they're kind of using contemporary instruments and sound techniques to amplify a story set in the past. Yeah,
I wouldn't like it as much if they'd just used instruments that were available in the 1800s. it wouldn't have awesome synths.
Yeah, but I think, it's interesting that how, and going back to what you said before, how they use those kind of quote unquote modern day for the time technology to tell that story, because because the synths, or I don't know what do you know what the actual synth was used, or
so started off using a Mini Moog and an ARP Odyssey.
I knew you wouldn't let me down on this point.
Also, the Freeman string symphonizer was used a little bit, which Ken Freeman actually designed and built himself. Where I was saying he was a pioneer earlier, he basically invented the first ever string synthesizer, which loads of other companies then ripped off and he didn't get any money for. But yeah, later on in the recording, because they got a bit more budget, he got a Yamaha CS80, which is the main synth that I believe got used for most of the record then.
But the sound itself is kind of otherworldly, because it's not a natural sound. There's a very kind of unnatural, mechanical, kind of inhumane element to it, and it's the right kind of instrument to kind of convey otherworldly creatures, because you need something that doesn't feel natural to kind of convey that extraterrestrial sense.
You've also got there's the clash between the instruments that would have been available at the time, so like the orchestras and that kind of things, and the futuristic instruments that, like the aliens were this futuristic culture clash that had suddenly invaded Earth. So you've got that kind of side of things as well.
Yeah, and any kind of natural instrument gets enhanced by kind of technology, or for example, like electric guitars, which are basically like acoustic guitars but plugged in.
Sort of.
There's a bit of a difference, but I roughly know what the difference is. I'm not. Anyone listening who wants to give me the detailed explanation, I don't care.
But I've got 4 notes on that. 4 pages of notes on that.
the pickup picks up vibrations.
This is true. So magnetic vibrations, which are then translated into an electrical current. And then it makes cool noises, and it goes into an amplifier, and you can have pedals and stuff.
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier about there's a distorted kind of a distortion effect that's very unique. It's applied on like a guitar, which I think is the heat ray, and I was kind of proud that I picked that up, because it's the Horstal Common where you got this kind of like guitar sound kicking in, and then Richard Burton starts describing the heat ray, and then you just hear
Yeah, well, there's I'm not 100% sure exactly how it was done. It was either done with various sort of octave pedals, or it was a multi-tracked guitar part. I think it might be a mixture of both. But there's like overtones and stuff, so it's like he's playing one note, but you've got the octave above and below happening at the same time, which can be done with pedals, but it sounds denser than that, so I think it was probably overdubbed. There's a lot of overdubbing on the record, because it was the first, or one of the first ever 48-track recordings made, and they had to get special equipment to basically sort of lash 2 24-track mixing desks together so that they worked together, and they could use the full 48 tracks.
Okay.
And I think they still ran out of tracks, because it was such an ambitious, ridiculously massive amount of instruments that they wanted.
So what highlights in this for you? So whenever I'm assuming that if you want to listen to this, you'll just sit back and listen to the whole thing in sequence, but which bit?
That's the thing. It's difficult to choose an absolute sort of favourite track, because it is important to listen to it as a whole, but there are a few sort of particular highlights, like obviously the Eve of the War, the opening track is amazing, because you've got Richard Burton's spoken word bit at the start, which I stole for my intro bit. Then you've got the strings coming in doing the call, like dun dun dun, which is probably the most famous bit of the whole War of the Worlds thing. Yeah. That's it. Then it goes all prog disco, and there's all like synthesized panpipes and stuff on there, which is just the most 70s thing ever. And then like Justin Hayward turning up singing about the chances of anything coming from Mars are 1,000,000 to 1. But then there's also Spirit of Man, which is the one with Phil Lynott as Parson Nathaniel. He's duetting with Julie Covington, who I believe was more of a stage actress sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That track is ridiculously overblown, but in a absolutely brilliant way. It's like there's no subtlety at all anywhere. But then I think my favourite track overall is Thunderchild, which is the one where it's the boat attacking it's the boat trying to attack the fighting machines to defend the steamer that's escaping, and it manages to buy enough time for the steamer with all the people on it to escape, but then gets completely destroyed in the process, and it's like the last hope of mankind at that point. But that song, it's like a distillation of all of the sort of really cool bits of the record, because it's one where nearly all of the leitmotifs and recurring themes all come back, so they sort of all blend together in that song.
Yeah, because is that the end of the first?
Yes.
Yeah. So it kind of like combines all the elements. So like you'll have like the riff from the first song come back to, and then it kind of like combines all these kind of things and like.
It's like the big cliffhanger sort of thing at the end of the first.
It is an action sequence. It's like and this is probably the first time on the podcast we've had an action sequence on the podcast to talk about.
Well, you've done. There's been concept albums before, but there isn't really an action sequence so much in A Grand Don't Come for Free, is there? Unless you count the Blinded by the Lights where they're going to the club.
Yeah. This is a concept album. Yeah, it's the first time we've actually mentioned the word concept on here. But But then, because it is a narrative. It is a narrative. And I don't think you actually mentioned this by name when we talked about, when we talked about concept albums in the past. But then again, I would not have put this and A Grand Don't Come for Free in the same. They're
like totally different worlds, aren't they? Even though they're structurally a similar sort of thing, because it's a record that tells a coherent story. Yeah,
as like a few minutes ago when you was talking, I was about kind of like how you have to listen to it all the way through. It's like with albums, with songs, you can kind of cut and paste kind of like songs into playlists, so you can have certain songs that you listen to more than others, and Grand Don't Come for Free. It's kind of like that. That's kind of designed to be. That's like that's like the TV show method of. Like seeing that, like, okay, there's an arc and narrative going through, but you can dip in occasionally. Like, okay, there's a serialized narrative, but you can dip into whatever. It's like, oh, there's a couple of episodes of Mad Men which are like some of the best TV ever. I'll just watch that one again. I've not watched it in ages. That kind of like dipping into where like here it's like a film or a book where like where like you can't just stick, I don't know, chapter 16 of War of the Worlds into a playlist and then read chapter 24 of The Time Machine and then chapter 3 of, I don't know, 50 Shades of Grey, and then you can't just put.
I don't know. I think some people with 50 Shades of Grey, I think there are some people that just read certain sections of that book, but they're people that like terrible books. Not that I've ever read it because it looks fucking shit. But yeah, it's basically an audio movie. So yeah, it's something that you need to consume the whole thing all in one go, preferably. You can sort of split it into the 2 discs if you really must, as a two-parter. But as long as you listen to the second one after you listen to the first one, because otherwise everyone's fucking dead.
Yeah.
And there's no upside to it at the end of the first one.
It's the Infinity War and Endgame of the music world.
It essentially is. That's right.
Spoilers for the
MCU. Absolutely right.
But yeah, I mean, I enjoy. I mean, I enjoy listening to it. It's not perhaps something I'll listen to a lot or occasionally. It might be, but it's a nice experience. It is like kind of like flipping on a movie on Netflix. On a Friday night and just sitting back and...
Which you prefer TV programmes as a short form kind of thing to movies anyway, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I would rather watch a TV... But then again, I say that... The
Latham limit.
Yeah, I'll say that. I'm like, I don't know if I've got the strength in me to watch a film and then watch about 5 episodes of a TV show, one after the other.
But it's because you're having, like... It's like you might be a bit daunted by eating an entire turkey, but if you've got like 15 turkey sandwiches, I might be showing myself as being a bit of a greedy bastard here with that train of thought. But yeah, you could eat 15 turkey sandwiches in a row. That'd be easier than eating an entire turkey.
But then if you got 15 turkey sandwiches, take the bread away, you've got 15 slices of turkey.
Yeah,
that you can probably digest, and it's easy. This analogy is going somewhere weird, I think.
It's not. It's just it's because there's a Christmas tree next to me. That's why I thought of turkey.
But yeah, so
you've mentioned a couple of times now. You've had vague, quick references to the Avengers.
Yeah,
and there is a sort of that kind of thing connection with War of the Worlds.
Okay.
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Book 2, which is Alan Moore's basic sort of spoof of Avengers, where he'd got loads of different literary characters that were all sort of out of copyright, so he could use them. So there's like Mina Harker out of Dracula, and like King Solomon out of King Solomon's Mines, and Sherlock Holmes and people like that turning up. Actually, no, it's Mycroft Holmes, not Sherlock Holmes. But anyway, it's like a literary character's Avengers. The second book of that is based on War of the Worlds.
Oh, okay.
And it's fucking brilliant. Don't get... The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film was fucking terrible. The books are amazing.
I've not watched the film.
Don't.
Yeah.
It's what made it a film so bad it made Sean Connery give up acting. As that was his last ever film, because he went, I can't do this anymore. This is terrible.
One thing I probably want to mention as well is that I think mainly because it's probably one of the last things I remember listening to just before we started recording was the song / chapter Brave New World, where the artillery man comes back.
Yes.
Which is David Essex singing.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's one where the kind of length and the repetitiveness of the kind of music in the background kind of makes sense, because I think it's... I assume like the idea is trying to convey kind of almost insanity with the artillery.
Absolutely,
and
on that track.
The definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
Yeah.
And I thought that was actually quite clever in terms of that. So he's talking about doing all these things, and then you got the same kind of thing repeating in the riff repeating in the background over and over again. And I thought that was kind of really well done. And I actually quite like the chorus of that as well, when the
all over again. Yeah. You've also there's a really cool bit in that where there's like sort of a military drum sort of sound that's synthesized on, I think that was on a Moog synth, which you've got that mixed with real live acoustic drums as well. And I think it might be one of the first sort of times where electronic drums and normal drums are mixed together, which is it's done on near enough every track that's put out these days. Well, not so much, but it's a really, really common thing. And back then, obviously, it really wasn't. And it sounds ace.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and there's a nice moment in actual arc as well, where there's a moment where he somehow manages to convince him to play a game, like card games for a moment, and there's like a peace of mind. But that's also the bit where he says, "Hang on, this guy, he's got to be realist. He's got to be the realist. They can't just sit here do nothing." So yeah, it's the end of Act 2, I think, that bit if in the film where it's like, no, okay, I can't stay here. I need to go and find whatever, and it leads up to from what and interestingly enough, I mentioned that I was talking about this album and the War of the Worlds and stuff to my boss and co-worker before I left work, and their reactions. My boss, who's slightly older than me, goes, "Bloody hell, that's a throwback," and the other person that we share the office with looks at me and goes, started talking about that film and that story has the kind of biggest Deus Ex Machina ever in terms of basically where basically the aliens just can't survive the bacteria, and that's it.
Yeah,
and it's very kind of abrupt turn, which again, which is I think in the novel, and it kind of just ends.
that's how it ends in the original book, definitely.
Yeah.
So the second alien invasion, they're going to turn up with some antibiotics.
Yes. They're gonna be wearing masks and socially distancing from the human. They're just gonna make sure the heat rays have got a bit more.
It does suggest that we've had Brexit, now we've got COVID. Perhaps the Martian invasion is what happens next year.
Oh man, I cannot wait for all the anti-Martian. Fake news.
Martians aren't real. Yeah. Oh, you just got destroyed by a heat ray.
I've not seen a Martian. I don't know anyone that's been burned to death by a Martian.
Can't be real.
Yeah. But yeah, so so that's the only kind of thing. The only kind of thing I was like, okay, the story kind of abruptly ending. But then again, I'm assuming that again due to the time. I think that's a H.G. Wells kind of. I'm not sure how to wrap up this story with what I've got.
Well. The humans did not have enough firepower, so there's no way that the humans would have been able to defeat them by fighting. So unless the ending is the Martians win, game over, it's the only real way out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless an asteroid hits the planet and that'd kill everyone anyway.
Yeah. But moving on. So have you ever seen the show live? Because this is what's quite interesting with this is that you've got adaptations of the book, but then you've got adaptations of this that's gone onto stage and a 5D experience. So have you ever seen any of those?
I haven't. No. I don't know. I don't really know why, but the live version doesn't massively appeal to me. I've seen the filmed version of So the first time they did it live, I think, was in 2006. That's when the filmed version that I've seen was recorded.
That's
anyway.
The film version of the stage show.
Yes. Okay. So it's okay, but it's not as good as the record. It's got really dated CGI animation. Would have still looked shit in 2006. It's like 1998 level animation. And there's a giant animated Richard Burton's noggin at the side of the stage that they just... It's like a big polystyrene head, and they like... Have you ever seen one of those things that you get at museums sometimes where there's a polystyrene head and then they just project the face to talk on it?
Yes.
Like they've got it... They used to have it at Tamworth Castle. I'm not sure if they still do one.
Okay.
It's like that, but his eyes don't move. They only animated his mouth. So he doesn't blink throughout the entire thing, and it's really like Uncanny Valley sort of level. It's really... It doesn't look good at all. It is cool that they've got a lot of the... not all of, but they've got quite a few of the original musicians who are still in the touring band is called the Black Smoke Band. So you've got Herbie Flowers on bass and Chris Spedding on guitar. Are definitely both still there. But yeah, it's not something I've ever been like, I've got to get a ticket for that. I'd maybe go if I'd got a free ticket or something. But I do want to do the VR 5DX experience version in London. My mum and dad have been to that and they said it was brilliant.
Okay, yeah, because that's be interesting. But cause I'm looking at some of the tours of this version. It's interesting who they've had play and who's been a part of it. I think Jimmy Nail has played Parson Nathaniel at one point.
So it's like, no, Nathaniel, she's lying.
Yeah, but like the role of Beth's been played by some kind of people I wouldn't expect to see on stage. So, for example, Liz from Atomic Kitten has played Beth in 2010. Heidi Range from the Sugar Babes and Jennifer Ellison as well. From
Yeah.
Brooklyn.
See, some of the Beths have been quite good, but I mean, there was a re-recorded New Generation version of the album in 2012, and Liam Neeson replacing Richard Burton. That doesn't particularly bother me. I think that's quite a good choice. But you've got Gary Barlow doing Forever Autumn, which can fuck right off. You got that dickhead from the Kaiser Chiefs as the artilleryman, which that sounds like a fucking war crime. And then, worst of all, you've got Maverick fucking Sabre as Parson Nathaniel instead of Phil Lynott, which that is so insulting that whoever suggested that should have their skin exfoliated by a cheese grater before being immersed bollock first in a vat of chili and lime juice.
Okay. I have no idea who Maverick Sabre is. This is the first time.
He's fucking shit is who he is.
Right.
I really don't like Maverick Sabre.
Okay. Right. Okay. No idea who he is. That's the first
You
time.
lucky man.
But I mean, interestingly enough, in the production that had Liz McLaren from Tommy Kisson, the artilleryman was played by Jason Donovan.
Yeah.
And I've
my old guitar teacher is currently guitarist in his live band.
I've got not a soft spot. I have no ill will towards Jason Donovan. I've always seen him as mostly harmless.
No, it was Douglas Adams.
I was waiting for that. So yeah.
I think Jason Donovan is all right. I wouldn't necessarily pay to go and see him. My wife has done.
To be fair, I will. Too Many Broken Hearts is a banger, and I will die on. I will state that case, and I'll die on that cross. Too Many Broken Hearts is great. It's
fair enough.
That key change is legendary. It's like one of the better 80s key changes. But yeah, there's the New Generation, which I'm assuming is just this re-recorded. There's also a kind of an Audible version or musical drama.
Yes,
done by Audible, a 5-hour Audible drama production based on the musical version. And it will feature an all-star cast, including Michael Sheen as the journalist, Taron Egerton as the artilleryman, Aid Edmondson as Ogilvy, Theo James as Parson Nathaniel, and Anne
Ogilvy.
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 The astronomer.
Pronunciation.
Theo James as Parson Nathaniel, and Anne-Marie Wayne as Carrie, the journalist's wife. So, but that was available.
I think that might be Jeff Wayne's daughter.
Okay.
That
was available on Audible from the 29th of November to. Oh, it's already out, 2018. All right.
Yeah, I have seen it on there. I've not got it on Audible yet, but I might check it out at some point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, reception of the album. Not too much in terms of rating stuff, but see Ben Ostrander review the musical version of War of the Worlds in The Space Gamer number 18. Ostrander,
yeah, I've read this one.
Ostrander commented that this is a magnificent 2-record LP narrated by Richard Burton, although not quite the same as Rails wrote it. WOTW is a kind of rock/radio play with modern interpretations. Included is a 16-page booklet with words, credits, and some great artwork. Said to be 2.5 years in the making, WOTW is better than most crap on TV and makes for a fun evening around the stereo.
We're allowed to say that in 1978.
But yeah.
There isn't a Pitchfork review in 1978, is there?
No, actually, I should have looked at Pitchfork. I've forgotten.
I had a look. I don't think they've ever reviewed it, mainly because it isn't very well known in America. I did a bit of like listening to various podcasts and stuff to see if anybody had done any podcasts on it, and there weren't many. There's one that I'll mention in a bit that is absolutely fantastic. And then there was one that I did listen to that was it's the Discord and Rhyme podcast, which is an American podcast, where one of the things that they were talking about is the fact that one or two people knew about this because they were big fans of the Moody Blues. But other than that, the rest of the team on there, because I think there was about 4 or 5 presenters on that, 4 or 5 hosts, hadn't heard of it, because it's not something that's in. I don't think the tours go to America, because I don't think it sold enough copies. So it's a very sort of British thing, but also it sold absolutely loads in New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah.
It's like something like 9 times platinum in New Zealand, which is
13.
with New Zealand population. Was it 13 times platinum?
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
10 times platinum in the Australia.
That's it.
9
yeah.
times platinum in the UK.
Obviously, the population in Australia and New Zealand are a lot smaller, but it's done on a percentage of the population that bought it.
Yeah.
Which is a fuck of a lot.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Worldwide, 15 million. But I'm going to end on this all music user submitted review I alluded to earlier, which
Okay.
by Glyn Lee on January 23rd, 2021. On holiday in 1983, my brothers and cousins closed me into a room of my uncle's with this playing. I'm not too sure if they thought it would scare me, but it blew my tiny mind. And ever since, it became the benchmark that all listening experiences have to live up to. I never thought the disco was cheesy or the laser pew-pews were ever camp. In the 90s, I used to get stoned with my dealer to it. The SFX are amazing, and the giant gatefold book is a thing of beauty, and the album is a classic loved by nerds, hipsters, and chavs alike. I would imagine that there have been a lot of joints rolled on the gatefold sleeve of this particular record over the years. Yeah, that thing. Yeah, I think hearing this is just like, okay, I can envision so many college students, just like baked out their head listening to this.
Yeah.
I would recommend you get the original vinyl if possible, but failing that, try to get the double CD with no extras. The remixes and added tracks ruin the purity of the original set list.
Definitely.
Yeah, because I ended on the Wikipedia page, I started seeing running down, and the special editions was like, oh bloody hell! How many things can you milk out of this?
There's like a 5 or 6 CD box set with loads of random extra bits, which some of that's sometimes interesting, but you don't really need it.
No, not at all. So we've done the live bit, slightly out of order, but
we've not done any bits you'd skip or anything like that yet.
I've not asked that in ages. That's how long it's been.
Haven't you?
Yeah, I think I can't.
Well, I've fucking written it down.
Which bits would you skip, Colin?
So there aren't really any tracks on the proper album that I'd skip. Like the bonus tracks on Spotify don't count, as we've just said. Fucking bonus tracks can fuck right off on this. But I'm not as keen on Forever Autumn, which a lot of people were. It's like the big hit single off it. It seems a bit like shoehorned in, because it wasn't written for War of the Worlds. It's actually, the melody was originally composed by Jeff Wayne for a Lego commercial in 1969. And it's like this little 30-second long instrumental version of it. The musicians that actually recorded it from his composition was a duo called Vigras and Osborne, and they added lyrics to the jingle and extended it to a full song as Forever Autumn. And then they released it in 1972 on their album, and it was a pretty big hit in Japan. So it wasn't written for War of the Worlds, it just got shoehorned into it. So, I mean, even before I knew that, I knew I didn't like it as much as the rest of it, because it just seems a bit different and a bit, there's a bloke just singing a random sad song now that doesn't seem quite in the same style as the rest of it. Also, Dead London Part 1 could probably have a minute or two shaved off without, losing anything particularly valuable, because it's sort of just a bit of a noodly synth bit to show that Earth has gone all otherworldly, basically.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so I think before we wrap things up to the end. I mean, you've grown up with this, so have you got any personal stories associated with the album?
I've got a couple with like a couple of like other friends that have grown up with it.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of connected to that. I had a mate that I was at school with that I was in my first ever band called Nathaniel. So every time somebody needed to reply to him in the negative, he just used to get people going, "No, Nathaniel," which really annoyed him, which was fantastic. And also my friend Gemma, who's been on a couple of episodes of Free With This Month's issue, is fucking terrified by this album. Still to this day, now she's like nearly 40, if she hears it, it really freaks her out. So I have been guilty of playing it at her a couple of times because I'm a twat. But yeah, it really scared her when she was a kid, and that's like stayed with her. Never really scared me. I've just thought it was ace. But on the sort of not personal side, one of the things I did want to talk about was like the people that appeared on it, because you've got obviously you've got Richard Burton, David Essex, Phil Lynott, all the singers get loads of acclaim, and there's like a write up for them in the sleeve notes and everything. But there are a load of amazing musicians on the record that don't get a write up in the liner notes, other than they're listed as, you know, playing bass and guitar and that kind of thing, and deserve a load more respect. So you've got Herbie Flowers is the bass player on it. The bass playing on this record is absolutely phenomenal. He's a really legendary British session bassist. He played on David Bowie's Diamond Dogs. He's played on a few Elton John records, including Madman Across the Water. He played Lou Reed's Transformer, which is probably the most famous thing that he's done, because the double bass, slidey bass line bit on Walk on the Wild Side that got sampled by Tribe Called Quest, that's really, really well known. That was him. And he also wrote Grandad for Clive Dunn out of Dad's Army. Then
Okay, that's...
There's some fucking left turns in this. It's mental. You got Chris Spedding, who was the guitar that wasn't the Heat Ray. He produced the first Sex Pistols demos. He was in a band called Sharks, which my dad absolutely loved. He played on Nilsson Schmilsson by Harry Nilsson. Sadly, he wasn't on Lime and the Coconut on that album, but he did play on Jump in the Fire. He played guitar on a couple of tracks on Tom Waits' Rain Dogs, which is one of my favourite records ever. He worked with Brian Ferry a fair bit after Roxy Music split up, and so he was on Let's Stick Together, but he was also in the reformed Roxy Music on guitar. And he also played with Brian Eno, another Roxy Music member, who was on Here Come the Warm Jets. He played guitar on Needle in the Camel's Eye, which is fucking brilliant. And he was also in the Wombles. And then you've got Ken Freeman, who we've mentioned earlier, who's on synth and keyboards, invented the string synthesizer, the Freeman String Symphonizer. So mainly he did a lot of soundtracks. So he did the Tripod soundtrack, which was obviously very heavily influenced by War of the Worlds, which... another We Made This network connection, because there was an episode of Right in Childhood, one of their, might even have been their first episode, I think. It was on Tripods. But he also most famously did the theme tunes to Holby City and Casualty, which was sampled by Oxide and Neutrino on Bound for the Reload. Which means that this record is an unlikely link between So Solid Crew, Lou Reed and the Wombles, which there can't be many records that have like one link of separation between those three. Then you've also got Barry Morgan on drums, who played in, there was a band called CCS, who most famously did the version of Whole Lot of Love that got used for the Top of the Pops theme tune in the 70s. And he was also, from doing a bit of research, it seems, I haven't got full confirmation on this, but he was possibly in the Barry Gray Orchestra, who did the theme tunes for loads of the Jerry Anderson Supermarionation stuff like Thunderbirds and Joe 90 and Captain Scarlet, which is pretty cool.
Wow, and here's me thinking that I wouldn't beat the composer of the DuckTales theme tune appearing on a Steps album.
That is a fucking brilliant fact, though. I very much enjoyed that fact on the Steps episode. Yes.
That's almost on that level. No, that's I don't. Not even any. I mean, okay, there's also like Crew nearly, but no, I don't. It's going to take It's going to take some beating for the title track of a Steps album being written by the guy who created the Chippendales and the DuckTales theme tunes. But so there's quite a lot of lineage that you can spin off this. I mean, Bound for the Reload, I think it's great. It's like when Garage was decent. Actually, no, absolutely. I missed UK Garage. UK Garage hasn't been UK Garage since like 2002. But I mean, So wow. Okay, it blows your mind when like you think about what's connected to what and everything, and
Yeah.
So where would you recommend people to go next for Jeff Wayne? Has he done anything else? Or?
He has done a few other little random things. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them. So he tried to sort of reclaim this kind of idea in the 90s he did a Jeff Wayne's Spartacus album, which is very much not good.
Okay.
I've listened to it once and it wasn't worth the time. Obviously, I've already ranted about the new generation version of War of the Worlds. Also, there were two remix albums, Ulla Dubulla and Ulla Dubulla 2. Basically, if the Martians invaded again and wiped out the entire human race as a retaliation for those two records, it would be justified. They're fucking shit. So what I would recommend, so basically Jeff Wayne, just listen to War of the Worlds. It's fucking great. Go to the immersive experience thing, because that looks ace. I want that to be successful so that when there isn't a pandemic and I feel a little bit more confident going to that kind of thing, it still exists. So if everyone else can go for now, that'd be great. But what I would recommend related to it is for other versions of the story. There is an absolutely brilliant podcast called Eddie Hurst's podcast version of War of the Worlds.
Okay.
Where it's a comedian from, I think he's from Manchester. Sorry, Eddie, if you're not. Basically, he reads a chapter each episode of the book, but has got loads of like comedic footnotes and little bits of random research and stuff. Like there's an episode where he's looking into like H.G. Wells' sort of like views on colonialism and stuff like that, because there's obviously a lot of colonialism themes, and the implications of that on like a modern audience and stuff like that. So it's really clever, but very, very silly at the same time, and it's really funny. It's great. He's towards the end of the book now, so obviously don't start with the most recent episode. Go back to the start and listen to all of them. But he's actually doing some live shows in a few months' time. So he's playing at the Leicester Comedy Festival in sort of, I think it's February, March or April. Have a look online, you'll find out.
It's one of the months.
Going to go to that.
It's one of the months in.
Yeah, it's one of those months in early 2022, which I'm hoping to go to one of them, because I've really been enjoying that podcast over the last couple of years.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, Eddie Hurst's podcast version of War of the Worlds is really, really good. They're quite often nice short episodes, about half hour long, as well. So you can fit them in nice and easily.
Right. Okay. Might be worth having a look.
Definitely.
Once I've got my massive backlog of podcasts.
There's also some really good sort of things that I hadn't particularly noticed. Like he was talking in the early episodes about how this War of the Worlds is concentrated in an incredibly localised area of basically Berkshire and a little bit of London.
So that's it. As I'll if if I ever get through the ever growing podcast list, because I keep finding, it's my fault, keep finding podcasts to listen to. But
yeah, and sending them to me, so I've got a fucking backlog.
Oh dear, I'm sorry. See.
I have found some very good podcasts from you introducing them, so I don't mind that. That's all good.
Fair enough. So, right, okay. I don't usually dread this question, but Colin knows coming up. But there's always a reason that I always seem to reference you all the time whenever this question comes up, which is the song for the playlist. Which, for those of you who've not listened to this before, and this is the first time listening, what this is I've got a Spotify playlist which has songs that guests have picked. So I'm going to ask Colin to pick one song or one track or one chapter or whatever you want to call them from this album to put onto the playlist. Currently, the longest song on there is still held by him. Technically, I think Bill does have 2 tracks, but I still think the combined time of both doesn't actually surpass the Bright Eyes.
No, and that was wasn't that like episode 3 or something?
Episode 4.
Episode 4, yeah.
Yeah.
So, right. You're going to be pleasantly surprised because I found a way around this. Because I'm assuming that I can't just put the entire album on there.
No, you can't.
So, if you're not listening to the entire album, normally you would never listen to this version as an album, but Jeff Wayne put out a highlights version of War of the Worlds.
Okay.
Where it was basically sort of shortened versions to try and get radio play. It was originally put out as a radio promo to try and get some radio play at the time, and then they released it later on as a single disc version. And the version of Thunderchild on there is 5 minutes and 6 seconds long.
Okay.
But also, because of it being an edited, cut down version, and it's not all melded into the track before and stuff like that, it starts better for a track being on its own, because the tracks all sort of, or most of them, like flow into each other. Mm-hmm. So that means that if you just skip to, say, track 4 on the normal album, you'll get a really abrupt start because it's, essentially mid-chord. So if you go for this version, it starts in a more coherent sort of way rather than sounding like you're already halfway through a song.
Right. So you're picking Thunderchild, but the
Thunderchild because it's a nice distillation of all of the album, I think, and it's got, as I've said many times, some fucking awesome synth noises on it.
the highlights version. So
the highlights version. So if you if you just type Jeff Wayne in, it's one of the albums is highlights.
Yeah, I think I've just found it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh right, and you couldn't tell me that, and you've told me about that version of the album now.
Yeah, I don't want you listening to that as the fucking version when you should be listening to the whole thing. Because you would do.
Well, that's only 50 minutes long.
I know. It's blasphemy. That's what it is.
Still too long an album. That's still too long for an album. 52 minutes.
You really need to get Tracy to record another episode with you because the two of you agree on so much.
Okay. I'll let you talk about your co-host on the podcast that you listen to. If people want to listen to your podcasts or all the stuff that you do, where can they find them? Right,
so I've got 3 other podcasts if you count Shipwrecked and Comatose, which me and Matt are regular guests on, which is a Red Dwarf one. But in the realm of the music, which is my home realm, I've got We Dig Music, which is me and my friends Ian and Tracy, who've also both appeared on Pick a Disc before. And each month, what we do at the moment is we select a year. So we've got 1982 coming up, is the next one, I believe, depending on when this goes out. And we basically pick our 10 favourite songs each of that year and then vote on it in secret. And then we record an episode where we find out how they all scored and generally argue about it in what we hope is a comedic way. And yeah, I'm normally the best one at that. I've got more number ones than anyone else because I have better music taste than the others. But then the other podcast that I have is Free With This Month's Issue, which is me and Ian from We Dig Music and a different guest each month, and we listen to an old free CD from Kerrang, Metal Hammer, Enemy, Uncut, Q, that kind of thing, and discover the various horrors and delights within. And you can find both of those by searching for them. Because, you're listening to a podcast now, you see that little magnifying glass bit at the top of your app. You just type the names of them in there. So We Dig Music or Free With This Month's Issue. Alternatively, they are on our website, which is wedigpodcast.com. They're both on the We Made This network, so you can find them on like We Made This channels and all that. And yeah, we quite enjoy doing them. Some people enjoy listening to them. You should join them.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who unfortunately enjoy listening to them as well. Yeah,
Thanks, mate.
No, it's fine. I think I still find it kind of weird because I can remember actually listening to We Dig Music even before, like a while before I even thought about doing this again, which is weird. So it's still kind of weird that I'm talking to one of the hosts of the podcast I used to listen to. So even though technically I've probably known you longer than the podcast has actually been around there. So.
Yeah.
Give We Dig Music and Through This Month's podcast a listen to. They're great. I do regard them as kind of sibling podcasts to this one. We're in the quite close family. So yeah, well, the podcast that this podcast is probably closest to, or one of them anyway. So so you're not going to hear anything negative about them from me on a publicly recorded section of this. Just
you just PM those messages to people later.
Yeah, because I hate that. God, Colin is bloody awful.
Keeps making me listen to really long albums.
Yes. But yeah, no, Colin, we've unfortunately come to the end of our chat, and this is going to be perhaps one of the first episodes that's actually shorter than the album being talked about. Perhaps once I put in all the contractually obliged We Made This trailers and stuff, but after editing, this will probably be shorter than the album. So, thank you for capping 2021 off for Pick a Disc.
Anytime, mate.
No, and hopefully at some point we might see you come back in 2022.
Oh, definitely.
I don't think I've got
definitely aiming for a number 6.
I don't think I've got a choice, to be fair, but I won't have a choice, I think.
Oh yeah, I'll just turn up.
Yeah, just start hacking my spreadsheet with the. No, you don't want episode 100. Yeah, Colin, thank you ever so much for coming on.
Anytime, mate. Have a good Christmas.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/We Made This. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
Hello everyone, this is Tony, Network Chief of We Made This. As you know, our podcast network brings together a brilliant assortment of talent who talk about all kinds of pop culture content, such as the episode you just listened to, or maybe you're just about to listen to. We're not going anywhere, but we'd love to keep the lights on for even longer if you're able to support our network on Patreon. For just £2 a month, you get your name in lights and the satisfaction of knowing you're helping us produce more great audio. And for £3 a month, you'll get your name in lights, but you'll also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast from the We Made This talent pool on podcasting, pop culture, and, well, you tell us. We'll take your suggestions. For less than the price of a coffee per month, you can help keep We Made This going. Just head to patreon.com/We Made This. That's patreon.com/We Made This. And get the ball rolling. Now, back to your scheduled programming.
Elsewhere on We Made This.
The TARDIS crew.
But the 11th hour is just something about the way he comes in immediately and just steals everything away from Tennant. Fish fingers and custard and boom. And then you get that ending scene where he's walking through the hologram images, and he deserves that at this point.
Absolutely. I think the 11th Doctor is a masterclass in introducing a new Doctor. I don't think any story has ever really topped that for introductions.
The Giddy Carousel of Pop.
I went to the San Remo Pop Festival on a plane. That's a smash hits memory for you. On a plane with Frankie Goes to Hollywood. We had Frankie, all of Spandau Ballet, all of Duran Duran, Sade, Chaka Khan, Bronski Beat, and Talk Talk, all on the same aircraft. I remember thinking, if this old barge goes down, then A, what's the insurance, and B, the Cocteau twins will probably have a hit next week because the whole thing will be cleared out.
Right in the childhood.
It's a documentary.
Oh, get in the bin.
So this was...
Oh, okay, right. We talked about prejudice, but documentaries, maybe that is the one.
So it was a Halloween thing where they had a lot of very famous TV presenters from the time presenting from the most haunted house in Britain. It was massively controversial at the time, and it was either you thought it was amazing and it was critically
like
well
Most
received.
Haunted.
Yeah. Ish.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.